a young Chinese student came to me and said, "My name is Mukherjee." He had taken an Indian name. His name was not Brian.
I know who he is.
Yeah, his name was
We
not.
know him.
Yes,
He's
yes.
Chinese and actually similar to the
Yeah, okay,
Mukherjee,
but
though.
his name was not Brian or Helen or his name was Mukherjee, and he comes and he talks to me in Hindi, and that made me so happy. Why are we talking in
He's
English?
a character. We love
Why are the
him.
three of us talking in English? Why aren't we talking in Chinese or in Hindi or in Urdu or whatever? When will that come? That stage?
I suppose no introduction needed. Vijay, round face. Oh no, Z, right? Round
Yeah.
face.
Z.
The company got around face.
Yeah, nice to be with you. Yeah, nice to be with you. You have to have a little formality. You can't just, Yeah, okay.
Nice to
Okay. You can pray in the evangelical style. Yeah.
I'm going to start with a gossip. Because this is what we were chatting yesterday. You said you like. Oh, the reason why it's these two talking is because yesterday you said you admire each other. You love him for being such a happy character.
I also love him.
And and we also love you.
No, he's happy. He's a great interviewer because he's so relaxed.
Yeah, well, that's it. And then
He'll ask me in a really relaxed way, when do you think the world is going to end?
No, and then you followed up by saying that you hate losing your temper, and then the only time you lost your temper was at the COP meeting.
Yes.
So I dug it out. Is that it?
Yeah, okay. The United States, 4-5% of the world's population still uses
Is that it? Is that the time you were referring to? Okay, so it went viral, both overseas and here in China too. What was behind that?
Well, there were two things that happened. One is that this was during the COVID pandemic.
That's 2 years ago, no?
Maybe 3 years ago.
Okay.
So it was in the heart of the pandemic,
Yeah.
21 maybe.
Yeah.
And so I had to go to the Glasgow airport to get the COVID test to fly the next day. And I was in the queue and there was a bunch of men in suits in front of me. And there was, they were talking about things, and there was a really nice guy toward the end of the group. And he turned to me and said, I was in my own sort of jacket. And then he said, "So what were you doing at the COP?" Because I had all the, the million badges. And I said, "Well, I'm a reporter and I came to talk about what I'd seen in Mozambique." And he said, what's going on in Mozambique? So I said, well, in Cabo Delgado, in the northern province, there's offshore, there's a big oil find. And two oil companies, French Total and Exxon Mobil, have the rights for it. But the people in Cabo Delgado are really poor. And so they started an insurgency. And, the French sent the Rwandan troops to intervene and whatnot. So I was telling him this story, with feeling because I'd been there.
Yeah.
And
So that was before the clip.
this was just before the clip.
Okay.
And I was just saying, look, and then he says to me, he had already told me that these guys work for an oil services company from Texas. Really nice guy, I must say. He was listening, and then 2-3 other guys turned to listen, and I was telling the story. And then one of the guys said to me, what's interesting? He said, it's really important what you're doing. And he didn't say this patronizingly.
Yeah.
He said it sincerely. He said, it's really important what you're doing. People don't know about these things and so on. He said, and keep doing what you're doing. But he said, nobody cares. And then, we went in and I told the nurse, who was a working class woman from Scotland, this is what this guy said. And she was, full of abuses because she had just tested them before. Anyway, I went back to the hall, and just before me was the scientist from the, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And she gave a presentation talking about, how countries like India and China are just damaging the planet because they're producing all these things, and there's coal burning and
there's so many of us.
Yeah, and there's too many people, and I was just sitting there. I was thinking of the guy who just said to me, "You're doing important work, but nobody cares." And then this person saying to me that look, it's China and India that are responsible. And there was like a fire.
Yeah.
And then the moderator turned to me and said, "So, what do you think?" And I just lost it. I mean, normally I never lose it because I think anger is the wrong way to
Yeah.
deal with the world. You know, the world is beautiful and people are so interesting and they have such, compelling stories. And why would you?
Yeah.
But this just drove me off the cliff. And well,
But that went viral.
Yeah, that
right?
went viral.
Millions of views.
Yeah.
but it's bad that anger gets a lot of views and love gets zero.
Yeah.
Like you want to talk about humanity and nobody wants to watch that.
But he doesn't seem that angry.
No.
Well, for me, that was anger.
That was anger for you.
Yeah, for me.
I think we're too used to the U.S. election campaign videos that this is not anger to us. I mean, this is very poised.
Okay, I felt angry. I felt really angry because, why? Because, when these people talk about the climate and when they talk about how, let's say, China or India or Indonesia, are responsible for so many greenhouse gases, there's three things that really bother me about that. One is everybody knows from the statistics that the West has exhausted the carbon budget.
Yeah.
Over the course of 200 years, they've ruined the environment. We know that. Secondly, we know that they have outsourced production to Indonesia, India, and mainly China. So China is producing goods and services, but a lot of goods.
We're polluting on your behalf.
On your behalf, exactly. That's the second thing. And the third thing is, what do you expect? Half the Indian population doesn't have proper facilities. So should we stop developing so that the planet is saved? In the West, it's okay. You have 4 refrigerators in a house. You can have 12 TVs. You can do whatever. But a house in India is not supposed to have electricity. Like that third thing, that drives me crazy because, what motivates us into doing this is that we feel for other people. What's the best kind of journalist? The best kind of journalist is a person who says, I want to tell the stories of people whose stories are never heard. That's the best kind of journalist. The worst kind of journalist is a journalist who just wants to report what politicians are saying. That's not a journalist. That's a stenographer in any political system. That's just a person who takes the press release and repeats it. I'm interested in, like you guys are, in going to see what are the things that are not being talked about. Whose feelings are not brought into the public domain. That's really journalism. And so we feel for people who have no electricity. I mean, what was remarkable, the greatest story the last 10 years in the world, eradication of absolute poverty in China.
Yeah.
That's the greatest story in the last 10 years. Tomorrow somebody could go to Mars. In my opinion, that's not the greatest story. On my list of 10 greatest stories, eradication of absolute poverty, I don't know what God would have to appear to push this off the list of greatest stories. It's an amazing story. Why? Because there are households where people were not able to eat properly, where they had no ability to read at night, no electricity. All of that is transcended. That is, socially, that's a miracle in social terms.
Yeah.
And that's why it really bothered me when people say, well, China, India, they should stop developing because it's ruining the planet. God, no.
So he travels around in an RV, going into some of the remotest places in China. You want to talk about that?
So I just want to talk about the video, the viral one, the first, because it inspired a lot of people, influencers, social influencers from developing countries like Vietnam. They found out that their country is still importing foreign trash. Not only like normal ones, but actually medical trash. Because for those who are doing international trades, have a container going, for example, from US to China to get goods back to US. But when it comes back, it's empty. So whatever you get in the container, it sounds like it's a basic bonanza, right? Bonanza. You can do everything. So they carry trash back to China. What's happening now is China banned importing foreign trash, I believe, 3 years ago or something. But they are now exporting trash to Vietnam, to Turkey. What Turkey is doing right now is throwing containers from Germany, actually, and the World Bank or whatever, I think IMF actually gave Germany the best country on recycling trash. How they recycle is just ship those containers to Turkey, and now Turkey is shipping those to Haiphong in Vietnam. So Vietnamese, knowing that they went outrageous, just like you. So they're normal, kindly, lovely people. But every, I think, patriot, or even you're not patriot, you're just living on this land, whatever stuff they don't want, get on your land, burn, and get in your soil, then it lasts forever.
Yeah.
In fact, it's really interesting. In the 1990s, one of the most respected economists in the United States, Lawrence Summers, who's well known in China, Lawrence Summers joined the Clinton administration. But before the Clinton administration, he was working at the World Bank. He wrote a memorandum, completely serious, okay? This sounds like a modest proposal by Jonathan Swift, which was written in the 17th century, where Swift said that the Irish produce a lot of children and there's hunger, so why not eat the children? His text is called A Modest Proposal. It was a really powerful expose of British imperialism in Ireland. Well, Lawrence Summers wrote a serious text, a memorandum for the World Bank. It's not like Jonathan Swift, a serious text. What he argued was Africa is money deficient. Okay, follow the logic. Africa is money deficient. Okay, the United States is trash.
Sufficient.
More than sufficient, has excess trash. So the US should send its trash to Africa and Africa can earn money for that. Okay, this was a serious World Bank memorandum.
That's like trash is America's comparative advantage, no?
Exactly. Now, when I first read it, I thought it was a spoof. I thought somebody had spoofed Jonathan Swift. But it was a serious memorandum written by Lawrence Summers, the grandson of Samuelson, whose textbook we all read in economics classes. And Lawrence Summers, highly respected till today, right? In the the actual racism in the proposal. Like Africa is a home of trash. Vietnam is a home of trash. China is a home of trash. It's the racism of the thing doesn't occur to them. Like they think it's a perfectly normal thing to say. China can make money recycling garbage. It's so racist. Why don't you take care of your own trash? In fact, even in the US, it's highly racialized. Incinerators are largely placed in black neighborhoods. Nuclear waste is put into Native American lands. And in fact, in the United States, they created a concept called NIMBY. NIMBY stands for not in my backyard.
Okay.
NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Yeah.
So the NIMBY concept, which is about not in my neighborhood, is now globalized. We don't want our enormous trash in our country. Let's send it to Vietnam, a country we bombed with chemical weapons.
As long as we don't see it. Yeah.
NIMBY.
It reminds me of the lead pipes right now. Biden is saying they're wishing to clear all the lead pipes right now in 10 years. And they have locals saying, okay, we're not doing that because they end up with some privacy stuff. And because lead pipes they use in lower income communities right now, they want to replace it with government, plastic, whatever. But when you replace it, you're not only gonna replace the public place pipe, you're gonna get in somebody's home and start doing stuff.
Sure.
People don't trust they don't trust U.S. government. They say, "Oh, we're doing good for you." They remember the black community of Tuskegee, right?
Exactly.
They're saying, "Oh, free vaccine," and you get, the stuff. So I don't know. Sometimes when I see those conspiracy theorists, I feel sorry for them. At first, I thought these people are crazy, but after learning all the stuff, I feel like
I see where you're coming from, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's scary, right? You suddenly realize that, wait a minute, maybe some of these things are true. I mean, the issue is for us, the reason I always tell, when somebody will say online, you're a conspiracy theorist, I say, yeah, but except everything I'm saying is factually based.
Hey, do you know that we received, which I think is the highest compliment to our account on YouTube. So our account has been recently shadow banned. You can see it from the stats, you know that. And but there's a comment that says that this is clearly a China propaganda. I mean, I would love to be a China propaganda if we're supported by the government, where I would announce it 100%, I would own it. But we're not. So it's okay if you call us propaganda. And then the guy goes on to say that, but everything it says is the truth.
This is interesting.
And that's the best compliment ever, man.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you deal with that? Yeah, I find this perplexing, because one of the interesting things about the US government as a government is that it's remarkably transparent after the fact. So unlike many governments, and this is really something quite unique about the US, unlike many governments, after 30, 40 years, they release their documents into the public domain.
Yes.
So, CIA files and so on are released. But there's a lag of a generation, which I understand. Why should a government put its immediate state secrets online? But it is actually pretty impressive that the US government just puts its things up online. I spend a lot of time, my free time, reading CIA documents from the past. I find them amusing, Firstly, in the old days, the CIA agents wrote really well. So, they would be in Iran, they would meet different people, they would meet religious figures, and they'd write these reports. They were extremely well-read people in the old days. Now, the quality of the CIA has declined dramatically. Their reports are no good, including British intelligence. The old days, the reports were fabulously written, almost like literary documents. Anyway, but, you can go back and you can read that they couped in Guatemala. There's like a whole section of the archive. They just tell you, this is what we did. It's amazing. And so the thing about conspiracies is that if I was alive in 1954 and I said at the time that this is a coup d'etat organized by the US government, everybody would have said, he's a conspiracy theorist. He's crazy. Don't listen to him. But then 30 years later, I write a book saying this was a coup organized by the US government, and they say this book should, be taken seriously because it's based on the CIA documentation. So that's one of the problems. It's a kind of schizophrenia. We know the history of the US government and its operations around the world. We know that. We know until the last CIA document was released, what they did before that. But the US government is very clever. They release these documents and say, look how democratic we are. We release documents. But then the last document is the last time we did something bad. After that, we've reformed. So you can never say that there was a coup in Honduras or there was a coup in Bolivia. They just deny it. Say, oh, there wasn't a coup in Bolivia. It didn't happen in 2019. But in 2049 or 2050s, if I write about the coup, they'll be like, yes, there was a coup in Bolivia. It's a very clever way of misleading people. So anytime you criticize the government and sort of what they say, join the dots, yeah? If you try to join the dots, they say you're a conspiracy theorist. Now, if you join the dots, historically, you're a historian. It also begs another problem, which is that there are some people who are in our world who join the dots with crayons. They exaggerate the dots, and then they make those of us who are joining the dots carefully appear crazy.
Look like,
Yeah, because we get associated with them. So I always tell our friends who are joining the dots with crayons, take it easy. You don't need to exaggerate things. It's bad enough. The US government arming Israel and letting Israel conduct a genocide is bad enough. You don't need to then say, oh, this, that, and the other, reality is clear enough.
You've been to, yesterday you said you've been to 4 Middle Eastern countries this year. Where did you go?
Well, I went to the Gulf states,
Okay.
and I was in Egypt briefly.
Okay.
This has been a hard year to be a journalist and want to go to Gaza is a difficult situation. it's hard to get permission to go into Gaza. I went to Gaza in 2014, and I was surprised by two things then. One is even that destruction in just a few weeks of Israeli bombing was intense. But the other was that Gaza was not what I imagined. It's actually a beautiful place. It's on the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Palestinians have built universities, you know, for God's sake, malls.
When was
you
the
know,
last time you were there?
2014.
2014.
Malls, and, you know, was a highly developed place. You know, middle class neighborhoods. You know, the Palestinians have a high rate of education. It's an important part of their, you know, the culture that they've developed as a people in exile. You know, if you lose your land, if an entire population loses its land, the only coin you have is education. You know, imagine if a whole population is exiled, yeah, and you don't have access to land as a grounding for your wealth, and you know you don't have family wealth because you lost your house and you lost this that. You're going to insist that education is where your children go. So Palestinians have a high rate of education, which is why you see so many doctors being killed, so many scientists. You know, Gaza has so many scientists. You walk in Gaza City and there's art galleries. You know, Gaza was not a large slum. It's a wrong imagination. It was middle class neighborhoods, and what the Israelis have been bombing are multi-story buildings where entire families are perishing. You know, these are all constructed by the Palestinians. You know, they have engineering skills and this, that, and the other. But I was keen to. I've been reporting this war as much as I can from outside. I have, you know, friends and contacts in Gaza. Some of them unfortunately killed this year. But you know, like, it is a painful conflict because, you know, in China the numbers are not going to mean much. 50,000 dead, 60,000 dead. You know, in a country 1.4 billion, India the same size. You know, 50,000 doesn't sound like a lot of people, you know. But you got to remember that 400 families have been wiped out. If you put it like that, it's different. Imagine your entire family wiped out. You know, your cousins, your uncles, your whole line from your great-grandparents down is gone.
Well, I'm a social influencer, so what I'm finding out is people are getting tired with numbers, even with graphics, and due to social platform restrictions, they're not allowed to put those, you know, pictures, whatever. Either get demonetized or you just get banned. So a lot of influencers on YouTube, I know, my good friends, their accounts got deleted. I've never seen these
Deleted for
I don't know, maybe called anti-Semitism. So it's Google and whatever. So it's really a dilemma. So I know it's I see there's a urgent need to tell my audience what's actually going on, but there's too many difficulties for social influencer to put this. It's sad. Okay, it's not easy to sell goods, which is the mainly where I get revenue, right?
Correct.
And people say, "Oh, we've been tired working all day. We don't want to hear that much about I don't know, whatever small place and at the other side of the earth. I want to hear something about my life. I want to listen to whatever next to me, nearby, not something far away." So it's all difficulties, challenging influencers, I believe I've encountered and they should have encountered throughout the world. Yeah.
But you would say that in China, generally, like honestly, the public opinion is on the side of the Palestinians, would you say?
Yeah, of course. I think a lot of Indian people, of course, support Palestine, but for some reason, the Modi government is supporting Israel at the same time. So
No, I mean in China. Like the
in
public
China.
opinion,
Yeah.
Because I was speaking to some friends outside of China. I mean, they just assume that okay, there is no public opinion in China because the Chinese government has chosen to sympathize with the Palestinians. So you just assume but I'm asking like generally, honestly, we've done a survey. I think you helped us promote, and it was like literally like 100%, 99.9% supporting Palestinians. And so we ran it. Obviously, it's a biased sample because it's within our.
No, but that's still a sample.
Yeah.
I mean, let's think about a parallel.
Yeah.
Let's say the Chinese Communist Party, founded in the 1920s, goes through its ups and downs. The communists and the Red Army decide to go on the long march. The war breaks out with the Japanese, 1937. And then the revolution takes place in 49. It's like a 25-year journey, long journey. In the middle of that, a bunch of Americans come to China. Edgar Snow spends a long time with Mao Zedong, plus his wife is there. Writes a remarkable book, Red Star Over China. And he's not the only one. There are 4 or 5 people who come and write books about the Chinese Revolution. They stay with the Chinese Revolution. Anna Louise Strong writes journalistic articles, also writes a couple of books. Nobody said to them, this is exhausting. Millions of people dying in the war and fighting against Japanese fascism. Let's just tell our own next door story. The government of the independence fighters in India, Nehru and others, sent an ambulance to support the Chinese struggle against the Japanese. In India, there were a number of Chinese writers who were very well regarded and wrote regularly on what was happening here. Nehru raised the question of the immense courage of the Chinese people in fighting against Japanese imperialism. I mean, that went on for decades. And nobody then said in India or Europe, we're getting tired of this story. Let's not focus on Mao Zedong. They're up there in Yan'an. Let's just avoid them. No, people kept coming to Yan'an to say, what's going on here? And millions of people dying. The courage of the Chinese people to battle against the Japanese at the time was inspirational to the world. The Second World War in China was longer than in Europe. It starts in 1937 and really it ends in 1949. 45 is not the end because those 4 years, okay, you call it a civil war, but it was also a lot of, and I would even argue that the war in Korea is even a continuation. But in Europe, it's from 1939 to 1945. And yes, 25 million Russians die in Stalingrad, the battles and so on. Lots of people died there as well. But we never ever said in the Indian freedom movement that, it's getting tiring. Let's stop hearing about China. No, we must continue because the struggle for human emancipation has no limit. There is no sell by date. And I agree with you that one of the problems of the structure of the internet media is that it's feel-good content that gets monetized. I very much agree with you. It's hard to get away from that. But look at this lovely mug with a cat going through a watermelon. Watermelon is the symbol of Palestine. So, maybe this,
We actually had this mug long before the recent war broke out. So somebody foresaw everything, I suppose.
Well, I suppose so, and I would monetize this and say it's a pro-Palestinian kitties for Palestine.
No, you can get arrested in Britain, I believe. If you hold a piece of watermelon and you get a treat.
Because these are the colors of the Palestinian flag.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting is the way this worked out is that there were many countries where the Palestinian flag was banned. Many countries. And so the watermelon stood in for the flag. What was dumb about banning the flag is a symbol. You can't ban what's behind the symbol. You can ban a symbol, but you can't ban what's behind the symbol. That's impossible. You'd have to incarcerate millions of people If you want to stop people from saying, well, I stand with the Palestinians. But fatigue, war fatigue, it's a real thing. I mean, I've covered a lot of conflicts, Iraq and so on, and editors will tell you, nobody wants to read these stories anymore. There's fatigue. And at that point, one has to be creative in telling stories as well. So in this last year, I've done a lot of stories. I did a story about noise, because that's important. Parents, middle class parents, but also all other parents. When you have a child, you want the child to go to sleep at night in silence. You tell them a story.
Yeah.
You give them a bath. Everything is, put the lights down. You sit with them for a few minutes and you leave the room. You want silence. Palestinian children are sleeping through bombardment because aerial bombardment happens at night. And a whole generation has had a year of trying to sleep through bombardment. They're terrorized and traumatized. That's a story. It's a story that actually, it touches a parent anywhere in the world. It's not about dying. It's about the noise. So there are ways that journalists have to also be creative to be able to continue to interest people. So one of the things I had to learn was what's the sound of a bomb going off, as opposed to say a car driving by. A car, so many decibels. Yeah, and sometimes you say, my God, that we live on a road, it's so noisy, we'll put a white noise machine for our kids. Well, a sound of a bomb is 1,000,000 times more than a car in terms of decibel levels. And I'm talking about a bomb dropping 1 or 2 kilometers away, because it's the sound waves that travel. That's what a journalist has to do, is we have to keep trying to find ways to tell the stories that are meaningful to us. And editors, man, you have no idea how editors can be, because I worked in the print media and they tell you directly, your stories, advertisers don't want to fill the international page with your stories. Directly. You talked about monetizing. They say
YouTube
directly.
also tell me that the ads don't want to put on your page because you're telling too many sorrow stuff.
And in China, he's like a multi-million to like all social media platforms combined to 10 million or something. And as we were saying earlier, there is no way to monetize other than trying to sell some products, and they don't want to be associated with war pictures. I mean, how do you put up war pictures and kids dying and say that buy this can of orange juice or something? So yeah, it's a difficult world.
Yeah.
I feel like telling story, IDF been doing a very good example on that. I mean, Himalayas, his death. So at the first time, there were propaganda in saying he's a terrorist, right, in Security Council. But after learning that from his death, that he was living with only 2 or 3 soldiers without eating for 3 days. So I guess it's very interesting because some platforms are advocating for IDF propaganda, but they're not realizing that propaganda from IDF actually helping people to know more about Hamas and the Xinhua. So I don't get, the world is, you see, very chaotic. That's why the good people are trying to do good thing, but shadow banned, they're not allowed to do so. The bad people, if someone caught them doing the bad thing, but in a good way. There is a Chinese saying called 无心插柳柳成荫. Literally means you want to plant and it's not growing. You occasionally throw something, whatever, wherever, and grow into a very good, park, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, this begs 1,000,000 questions, okay? Because one is, there is an information order that exists there, It's fascinating how the Facebook, for instance, dominates the world transmission of knowledge. Now, I understand that China is slightly different because the Great Wall of Mandarin has created its own apps and its own social ecology of media. Yeah, and so people don't use the Facebook and Meta products as much, although they do use it a little, but not as much. But in the rest of the world, these things are quite influential and important. But it's not just that, it's the hardware. I live in Santiago in Chile. For me to talk to you, information has to go from my house in Santiago down a cable that goes to Los Angeles, and then the cable that goes across the Pacific. The cable that goes from Santiago to Los Angeles is owned by a private company. Now, they could easily say that, either these 10 accounts or any metadata you use these words will slow it down. They don't need to ban. What is shadow banning? Shadow banning isn't a ban. It just means that things are slowed down for you. So that if you and I are doing an interview and I'm in Santiago, my internet is slowed down. So it becomes difficult for us to do this properly. So we just have to say, well, you'll have to say, look, I'm no longer going to talk to you. There are many different ways in hardware. And then software is important. Even people I know, they feel like, well, okay, I like reading you, but in the morning when I wake up, I go to BBC to check the news. I don't go to you to check the news. I go to BBC to check the news. Or I go to CNN or, something or the other. This is fascinating. The colonial grip on our brains, how many people wake up in the morning and they say, I'm going to go to CGTN to see what the news of the day is, or RT, I think if you're reading in Russian, you may go to Russian news channels. If you're reading in Chinese, you'll go to Chinese news channels. But, those who read in other languages, or whose default language is one of the European languages, end up going to these so-called mainstream, and even if they don't, and here comes the worst part, a reporter in China will, to find out what's going on in, say, Romania, because there's an election,
They'll go to Western media to find
we'll
out.
go to Reuters. We'll read the Reuters wire, we'll read the Agence France-Presse wire, we'll read the Associated Press wire in order to write their story. Because they don't have contacts and sources. So even their stories in Chinese, in Russian, in Hindi, totally defined by the Western media. So we have an uphill task, And I must say that, even when big countries like China and Russia are the two that have actually, and Qatar are the three countries that have tried to build international media. Al Jazeera, CGTN, and RT. These are three countries that have tried to build. Even they haven't really been able to build very good footprints around the world. So Al Jazeera is largely Arab reporting. The rest of their reporting, they have one guy in Africa, somebody, it's nothing. Chinese media is similar. There's just not enough of a footprint. Chinese media reports the US better than it reports South America. Xi Jinping was in Peru to open a port. I don't know how much news coverage there was of that. $3.6 billion port, 18 berth, very important development. But the news stories I saw didn't talk about the fact that just a few years ago, the attempt to build a port in El Salvador was stopped. Why weren't these things brought together? Because journalists don't have a longitudinal history of following these things in our countries. And this gives us a problem because then you just absorb the stories from the Associated Press. So when are we going to get confident not to be like second order reporters, but to make, to be the references?
Is that part of the reason why, a lot been talked about at the conference yesterday, that the mood in the global south is shifting, like people are sort of united in what they are against, but effectively what is the new world order, what are the new narratives going to look like? It's very difficult to build solidarity around that. Is that part of the reason why?
Part of it is that we just don't yet have the full confidence. Just to be very blunt with you.
Yeah, one of the key takeaway from the conference yesterday is like, what if you don't have the capacity to build a capacity? Right?
Exactly. Right? You have a channel. That's two channels. Yeah. How many people outside China will spend time watching what you're saying. You have to have an ambition to have millions of people outside China watch what I don't make media for India. I want viewers and readers from Romania, from Azerbaijan. We built a syndication service called Globetrotter, which I work for. I'm the chief correspondent. What we do in Globetrotter is, Shaoli, you will write for me an article, 1,000 words, on something that you've seen.
I remember you told me about that. Yeah,
and we syndicate it for free, and 400 publications around the world can use it. And they do. They do it in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia. They print it. Asia Times in Bangkok, La Jornada, one of the major papers in Mexico, prints our material in there. And it's free. It's basically like somewhere between an op-ed, an editorial, and a report.
Basically, you source from reporters or editors from around the world who can reflect the sentiment on the ground.
Yes.
Right?
So you have to learn to write about China for an audience in Mexico, in other places, and so on. So, but it's not like you're not writing for a 3-year-old. You don't have to explain everything. But the point is, we're trying to compete with a different form of journalism with the wires. And obviously, we don't have the capacity. Like, we can't release 10 stories a day. We release 3 or 4 a week maximum. Yeah. But I want to get to the point where we release 10, 12, 15 stories a day. Like, what's the biggest story today in China? Why haven't you written the 1,000-word piece? Okay, right now it's written, it's print, web and print journal. But eventually, why can't we think about doing some sort of video content where you report? And now you say, well, what about languages? There's a lot of AI tools that we can use, to try to dub.
Could you source more from our website and our video channels?
Well, we don't do video yet.
Oh, okay.
But
we have articles on our website.
Let's take it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. I mean, we started a journal a few years ago where we made a partnership with Wenhua Zhongheng, with editor Yan Ping, and said, okay, you have a journal in China. Well, I think that Chinese intellectuals of a certain sort are not listened to outside China. In other words, Western, think tanks and so on have relationships with Chinese intellectuals. It's not like no Chinese intellectual is read outside, but these are typically Western-oriented intellectuals that will be published by the Brookings Institute and by the Council for Foreign Relations in the US and by, some foundation in Europe and so on. These are Western-oriented intellectuals, and China is filled with Western-oriented intellectuals. But, it's just a factual.
Don't we know that?
Yeah, it's a factual statement. Yeah, no judgment.
And so many in the Chinese government too. The bureaucracy.
Well, you know better than I on that. No comment.
Agree with me.
No comment. Certainly in the academy, it's there because I read them. In these mainstream books and so on. But there are a whole other bunch of intellectuals who are interested in developing different lines. They don't have to be anti-US or anti-anybody.
Yeah.
There are people who are interested in what's going on in Africa. What's China's role in Africa? What does it mean to build an ecological China and so on? So with Wenhua, we said, look, you have a nice magazine, but we want to make an English, Spanish, Portuguese edition, an international edition, because we would like Chinese intellectuals' views to be out there. So we made it. We're on the 2nd year of this project. I feel the same about journalism. Like, where are the commentators, the people who we train, together to be serious reflectors? Okay, there's a, some speech given by a political leader or important meeting that could be reported. But more interesting to me is that there's a village in China where there's a football league. That's an interesting story,
that's an interesting story.
Why is that interesting? It's captivating. It tells you about rural revitalization, abolition of poverty. It tells you about how women dominate in the rural areas. You can beg the question, if there's so many women leaders at the rural areas, why aren't they in Beijing? And so on. It's great stories. We need those, I mean, I'm very much opposed to the gap between so-called hard news and soft news. I think that's a bourgeois distinction. There is no such thing as hard news. Why is the voice of a woman leader from a rural community telling you about how she's trying to improve the capacity or the potential of her people through using the internet for farming? How is that not as important as, let's say, a governor of a province talking about something? Why is her voice less important? It's as important. She's reflecting a reality. So I would love for Chinese journalists to be read, in other parts of the world. I would love more Indian voices in China. It's stunning how poor our mutual reporting is. In India, the coverage on China is appalling. It's all what is happening in small circle of the government. If that, people don't follow what's happening with much care. Similarly, in China, there are so few people. There's so few Indian journalists who are capable of writing for a Chinese audience, explaining the realities in India. And unless you have more people-to-people understanding, if the universities aren't doing it, journalists have to do it. Unless you have that, how do you expect countries to come closer?
How have you do you see the public perception about India here in China? Is it shifting? Is it better?
Well, it's not good because if you count on social platform, then they're, as I said, is for ads, for revenue. Otherwise, the social platform isn't providing any currencies. So you have to sell goods. To sell goods, you have to attract people into your video by what? By surprise, by anger, by moods, basically, not by fact.
Sensation.
So I will give a very good example. The BBC got a fake news saying the boss CEO of Uniqlo, a clothing brand, he said, we're not using cotton from Xinjiang, which is totally fake news. The Japanese version, because the guy is a Japanese, Yanai Tadashi, he told the Japanese-speaking BBC reporter that we're now not using cotton. Not using could be a lot of reasons. They make very cheap T-shirts. Of course, they use synthetics. Yeah, they don't use the cotton. It could be a good reason. But the BBC English channel says the Uniqlo is not using Xinjiang cotton. They changed it to does not. So not using and does not is totally different. Why
In Japanese, did he say Xinjiang cotton?
Yeah.
Because it was a question.
It was a question. Yeah.
Okay.
And after doing the Japanese version of interviewing, the Japanese-speaking BBC reporter actually faked another asking recording in English.
The questioning part.
Yeah, the questioning
Okay.
part was re-recorded.
Yeah.
Like faking, I'm asking.
Yeah.
This time, she was telling English. But the original video, she was speaking Japanese with the CEO of Uniqlo, right?
Yeah.
So I made that video doing fact checking. I saw a lot of video got more viewing count than me. They're just critiquing on Japanese imperialism for no reason. And telling their audience wrong name of the CEO. The guy's called Yanai, right? His surname. The guy is saying, Yaina. The order of the name is wrong, but doesn't affect. He's telling the anger to their audience, getting more viewing counts.
It's a very important point.
Yeah.
See?
You see, I mean, people like the Chinese social media or Chinese views are being criticized to be nationalistic. But I mean, here's the thing: they're wrong. I mean, he is the opinion leader in China, and he is very rational about it. So the CEO of Uniqlo has always maintained that we're going to stay out of politics. The BBC lady really forced it, shoved it down his throat, and then in the way they put it out. Now, technically they did not misinterpret or misrepresent him, but the way they reported it was very misleading. And sure, the Chinese internet followed because you always follow the bad news, right? Somebody's against China. They're boycotting Chinese Xinjiang while wanting to make money from here. And so they follow, and even with like sensible multi-million influencer like him, he put out very reasonable analysis of the whole thing, and it's very difficult to shift it. So
You see, Uniqlo should be sponsoring us right now.
They're not even.
They should be.
You should be.
Yeah, but your point is a really good point because it's interesting. You asked the question about India and he gave the example about Japan.
Yeah.
Because the point is what? The point is that our audiences also follow the kind of political atmosphere. And it is much easier to inflame people into
Yeah.
jingoism
Yeah.
than it is to inflame people to understanding.
Triggering
much easier.
hatred
Yeah,
to sell goods.
much easier.
It's much easier.
When
than
I write
reporting
in
facts.
Guancha, occasionally my friends will clip some of the comments
Yeah.
and translate and send it to me. And people write things like, this curry smelling Indian makes sense, and so on. And it is funny because in India you would get the similar reaction. There'd be some, these mutual antipathies and sort of casual racisms, that we have. These have to be overcome, but who leads in the process of overcoming it? A lot of this is to the political leaders. I mean, look, I've for years said the gaps between India and China are absurd. Honestly, they are absurd. And now, in fact, India is moving away from the United States because India has basically withdrawn from the Quad, which was Japan, Australia, US, and India. And then the US, to compensate for that, made the Squad, which was Australia, Japan, Philippines, and US. India has been saying to the US, we are not cutting oil imports. India is drifting away from direct US contact. In fact, India never supported the Israelis in this war. They just said we are for the two-state solution, which was interesting because I expected Modi to come and say, we stand with Israel. They never actually supported the Israelis. And a lot of the aid going from India is going through private companies. So it's been a complicated period. But what's the differences between India and China? We could solve this in a minute here. The border question, it's never the border question. Border issues are not impossible to solve. These are enormous countries. Yeah, you're going to tell me 2-3 kilometers, square kilometers difference is going to make all. We had 3 billion people. 2-3 kilometers difference in a very high altitude places is not what the problem is. Frankly, in 1962, in Aksai Chin, the reason it was important for China to build a road through there was to link Xinjiang province to Tibet. Okay, Tibet eventually in 59, the process starts of integration of Tibet fully into China. 1951, the Tibet comes into China. 59, the road was built to integrate these two provinces. That was the reason. Aksai Chin, nobody lives there.
Yeah.
It's a high rocky area of very little importance. Okay. Then in the Arunachal area, there is some debate around the Tawang area. All of these are solvable. There are negotiations to be had. You just put a map on the table and say, where did the British draw the line? What is a reasonable line? How do we both walk away from this without somebody feeling they've surrendered? Yeah? These are the ways you deal with it diplomatically.
So how come we never solved it so far?
But because there are always other things involved. It's not the border. It's like India and Pakistan. It's not the border.
What are the other things?
Yeah, that's it. So one of the issues is the question of the Cold War. India was a non-aligned country. When Nehru and Chou En-lai were together at Bandung, that decade was filled with possibility that India and China could have sorted everything out. The slogan in India at the time was Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, which is Indian and Chinese are brothers. That was the main slogan. That was everywhere. But after the 62 war, which was a real war, the common feeling declined between the two countries. And once you have an armed conflict and the common feeling declines, it's very difficult to go back to, India, China, we are just siblings in Asia. That's one problem. Second problem is, I'm sorry, the Japanese, with the Japanese co-prosperity sphere, ruined the concept of Pan-Asianism.
Exactly.
The Africans have Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
The Latin Americans have the idea of Patria Grande. We just don't have a concept, of Asianism. We are embarrassed because we are always reminded of Japanese soldiers with akasaki, those guns coming down. How do we revive an Asianism? So in Singapore and Malaysia, a bunch of intellectuals, Kishore Madhubani and people, in fact, Mahathir Mohamad, to some extent Lee Kuan Yew, all of them started to talk about Asian
Yeah.
values. Frankly, there are no Asian values. There are no values that are in common. It's absurd. You've got 3.5 to 4 billion people who live in Asia. There is no common value system. Yeah, if there was a common value system, we wouldn't have had Japanese imperialism. That shows there's no common values. There are competing values. Yeah. Okay, Buddhism comes from India, goes to Afghanistan, comes to China, but these things are complicated. So we have to revive the idea of some sort of Asian fellowship.
Some sort. What sort? Like
We have an old history together.
yeah.
Okay, the Himalayas were a problem. They posed a big challenge because people had to go all the way. We had Chinese travelers in India in the ancient world, and they are highly respected in India. An Swain is one of them. I'm not exactly sure how to say his name properly. This is how it's said in India. He walked all the way to India, and then in the 1930s, Rabindranath Tagore is very well appreciated. Comes here, meets Lucian. Gives speeches in China. Very much close to Sun Yat-sen's movement and so on. Goes to Japan, gives a speech warning about the rise of hateful nationalism. At the time, Chinese intellectuals go back to India with Rabindranath Tagore. They teach at his university at Shantiniketan. The family that goes back with Rabindranath Tagore, the man then remains in India, the Chinese man who goes with him. His son becomes a professor of Chinese thought in Delhi in the university. His grandson was teaching there until recently. I think he moved to Hong Kong. But that was 3 generations of people. We have all these histories which we don't know. A part of it is to get to know each other's histories and the common histories. I don't think people are aware of the role of Mao Zedong in India. The kind of fascination. India had independence in 47. But when the Chinese Revolution happened, it was an enormous shock to people. And then the fact that in China you could, abolish landlordism was an enormous sensibility. These are common histories. And I don't see why we don't spend more time. It is shameful to me that the Indian government gives so few student visas to Chinese students to come to India. We need more student exchanges. We need journalistic exchanges. We need more of this sort of people to people. We need to play more sports with each other.
Invite him then.
I would love to.
I don't know if they give me visa or not.
But what about sports?
Sports, like what?
What do you mean by what?
Rural football teams.
Real football games.
Why do you
Okay.
say that they won't give you visa?
Well,
Is that
I just know they rarely give Chinese visa right now.
into India?
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
Really? How long has
I
it been?
think, I think
It's-
after the clash.
after the recent
Yeah.
clash, it's
Yeah.
not been calmed down. Even though Xi Jinping and Modi met, and
Yeah.
they said we'll open a new dialogue. These things take time.
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed by it because, look, frankly, you go to any university in China and you'll see a whole group of Pakistani students. Because Pakistan and China have a close relationship
Yeah.
through the Belt and Road. And that's great. It makes me happy to see that. It makes me happy to meet somebody from, I was in Beijing. I gave a presentation with Wenhua. We released an issue. There were a number of people in the room. A young Chinese student came to me and said, "My name is Mukherjee." He had taken an Indian name. His name was not Brian.
I know who he is.
Yeah, his name was
We
not.
know him.
Yes,
He's
yes.
Chinese,
We
they're
know
actually
him.
similar to the
Yeah, okay,
Mukherjee,
but
though.
his name was not Brian or Helen or his name was Mukherjee, and he comes and he talks to me in Hindi, and that made me so happy. Why are we talking in
Oh, he's
English?
a character. We
Why
love
are the
it.
3 of us talking in English? Why aren't we talking in Chinese or in Hindi or in
Yeah.
Urdu or whatever? When will that come? That stage?
Well, I'm trying to study Hindi, but it's very difficult because
Really?
the
Wow.
pronunciation sounds all similar. Metigum and then
Metigum.
He, pu, ti, he, vi, everything sounds the same. Yeah. And there is a social influencer on a Chinese website. He's I believe the only student got a visa. Even he's studying international relations in Jawaharlal Nehru University. They're not giving student visa, even you got offers. In the metropolis, even they're very high, good schools. They only get like 6 students in that city.
Yeah,
Wow.
this
Six
to me is
Chinese
a
students.
mission.
Because I remember 10 years ago, there was a lot of backpackers, like independent travelers, going over there. So there was a like somewhat an Indian sort of like a craze going on. Among
Let's
the-
do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's travel more to Vietnam, to Laos. Let's do it.
Yeah.
What do we know about all these countries? I mean, there's now a train that goes right to Vientiane in Laos from China. But let's do it. Let's find out about other Asian countries.
Let's start a travel agency.
Yeah, why not? I mean, like recently there was martial law declared in Korea.
Yeah.
I've been to Korea a bunch of times recently.
Yeah.
I want to go to the DP arcade. It's not easy to go. I would like to go and engage people there, talk to them, see what it's like. I've been going recently to a number of island nations in the Pacific.
Yeah, how's that?
There are 400 US military bases in the Pacific. Did you know that? There are 990 US military bases in the world. 400 of them are in the Pacific. Yeah. And they're all in these little islands. And the people of these islands are saying, we don't want you here anymore. That's what it's like. I mean, it's hard to describe. At the conference, we had this remarkable woman from a small island in Japan, 50,000 people. It's not that small, but it's small in comparison. Gorgeous, the Pacific laps onto the soil, beautiful beaches. And what are these islands? Radar stations,
Yeah.
missile
Yeah.
silos,
American military bases, yeah.
and the French have like nuclear test sites where they polluted the water. All of this has to go. We need more beautiful beaches for humans to not go and ruin. I'm not interested in that, but whatever. It's better. Look, tourism is better than a military base. I know tourism has its problems, but it's definitely better than a military base. Hawaii. I was in Hawaii recently. I was with these people from the sovereignty movement. Giant US bases. They polluted the water thing. There's a place called Red Hill where the US was basically releasing fuel into the soil, polluted the water. US troops were getting cancer, not just the others. The Hawaiian sovereignty movement wants to remove the bases from Hawaii. Pearl Harbor will be gone. I went to Pearl Harbor. It's a bunch of rotting ships sitting in the harbor, with all their toxins polluting this beautiful, beautiful water. I love the beaches of the Pacific.
I have at least 10 Japanese friends tell me they have a theory. They're thinking there should be an urgent need to remove US bases because they believe they're releasing called PFAS. It's firefighting foam or solution to fight military-based fires. But that solution is anti-bow deposit, anti-light, anti-fire, anti-high, low temperature, anti-everything. So it's used to put out fire, but there's literally no way you can get rid of it.
Yeah.
And they're releasing that into water. It's already in underwater system. So their theory is the U.S. military is releasing PFAS into water system to eternally pollute the land. So even the locals want to protest and get rid of the military base. They will say, okay, this land is already impossible for civilians to use.
Yeah.
They only use it for military base. So there's no way you can use
Wow.
it. Why not let us stay?
Wow. I followed a story from Okinawa where the population there didn't want the base to be expanded. So they did a very clever thing. Now, Okinawa is actually part of Japan.
Yeah, of
It's,
course,
it's
yeah.
legally part of Japan, just to be clear. There's a US military base on it, which anyway is a reduction of your territorial sovereignty. But interesting, what this group did was they said, look, there's this kind of fish or dolphin called the dudong. And the dudong swims up into this one river. And so if the base is expanded, the dugong's habitat will be ruined. So what they did was they went to the US Congress, to the environmental whatever agency and some environmental congressional thing, and they made a complaint there. Now, again, just to repeat,
You mean the Okinawa people?
yes,
went over there?
Okinawa is part of Japan,
Yeah.
but they took the case to the US Congress to say that the US base, if it is expanded, will hurt this dugong. And the US Congress said, yes, we should protect the dugong.
It's
So
a
the-
Democratic Party.
Yeah, so the dugong,
It's a very sovereign nation.
yeah.
Oh, we're gonna spread this
Yeah.
everywhere.
And
yeah.
the dugong, therefore, is firstly more important than the Okinawan people, A. And secondly,
Oh, yeah, I missed that point.
Yeah, you missed that part.
I missed that point.
Yeah, that's an
Brilliant.
important point.
Yeah.
And the second, of course, is that the US
yeah.
has sovereignty over.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite stories of the absurdity of our world. Okay, and Japan is a G7 country.
Yeah.
You know that, right?
yeah.
Japan is like an important country, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big industrial country.
I read a report on The Guardian saying the lithium batteries is now big stuff. Biden and Trump want to make cars, vehicles, but you need lithium iron and lithium mine. The only working lithium mine right now in U.S. is in Nebraska, out of nowhere, I guess.
Yeah.
And the locals don't want this lithium iron mine,
Yeah.
so they're going to Congress saying there is a very rare flower called whatever Latino name, I don't know. The rare flower the habitat is only that place. So if they have a mine there, the flower has got nowhere to go. It's going extinction. And they took this to Congress. The only lithium mine right now is not working. The other one they're trying to excavate is on a habitat of Native Americans. And they say, last time you guys came here is for gold. Now you came again.
But this is interesting. This goes back to NIMBY, not
Yeah.
my backyard.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, let's go and mine the, living daylights out of, Chile or whatever to get lithium, but not in my backyard. So classic. I mean, you'll be surprised. The US has a theory of the island chains.
Yeah.
First island chain, second. This is a theory developed by John Foster Dulles in the 1950s. It's a very old theory. And they have built it up. I mean, Hawaii is an island, one of the island chains and so on. And everywhere you go, there need not be a full-scale base. But in all these islands, whether it's Guam, American Samoa, there's like tons of military on all of them. And the US and French have done something clever. Like in New Caledonia, they basically gave people military jobs. So then the idea is if you remove the base, there's no work. But in New Caledonia this year, there was a massive protest led by the indigenous Kanak people. And the Kanak basically are saying, French go. It's an incredible process that's taking place because, in the Sahel region of Africa, from Senegal to Chad, they're all saying the French bases have to go. If France dégagez, France go away. But this is spreading now to New Caledonia. It was a huge protest movement of the Kanaks in New Caledonia. It's called the Kanak Independence League. But this is not just in New Caledonia. This feeling was there in Solomon Islands and other places. And I think it's going to spread to Guam, to Americans. The Americans are going to face, pressure. Even in northern Philippines, I have a feeling that soon people in Luzon are going to say, look, I don't want you to build an intermediate missile structure here because then we'll become a target in a war. I was in Australia recently. The US is expanding the runway at Darwin, Tyndall Air Base in the north of Australia. And the plan at Tyndall is for the US to house B-1 and B-52 bombers. These bombers are nuclear capable. And if they actually finish the expansion and they bring in B-1 and B-52s, they will be capable of flying and releasing payloads in China. Intermediate rockets could fire from Luzon directly into Shanghai. Minutes, undefensible. You can't defend against it. People in Darwin are going to say, I don't want this, because then there'll be retaliation. I mean, so there's going to be a turnaround. This whole build-up of war pressure on China, it's not about China and the US. People in Australia, people in Philippines, they are going to turn around and say, we don't want a part of this. I'm telling you this.
But the sentiment is one thing. Are they going to be able to execute it other than resorting to going to the environmental agency to say that let's protect the fish? Like, I mean, is the public sentiment going to actually mount to political will?
You can just take the example of what happened in Africa. That public sentiment was so great. The governments had to be overthrown. And then the government had to say, okay, the French have to go. These are small island nations. Solomon Islands, a couple of years ago, was totally pro-American. And then there was a lot of pressure that we don't want to be a target in the middle of this war. And also, we would like to get involved in trading more with China. The government changed, they started trading with China. That was public sentiment. There were protests on the ground. So I'm not saying that, the Australian government will change tomorrow, or the government in New Zealand. These are big countries. They are old, Five Eyes, they have lots of white settler consciousness. But some of the island nations in the Pacific, Polynesian protest movements are picking up. In New Zealand recently, the government tried to change the old treaty from 1840. There was a treaty in 1840 to settle the war between the Maori and the British settlers. That was in 1840. They were trying to revise the interpretation of the treaty. There was a mass protest, and you must have seen the viral of the 22-year-old elected official, Hannah, forgotten her last name. She stood up in the parliament.
That went viral in China
course.
too. Yeah.
But that's the revival of a new Polynesian radicalism that goes from, Polynesian culture goes from New Zealand to Hawaii to Rapa Nui in Chile. It's a big triangle and all these islands in between. There's a real revival of sovereignty amongst the Polynesian people. It's going from Hawaii, it's all over the place. It's not going to disappear. You asked a correct question. Is public sentiment going to change things? I don't think we should say it one way or the other, because you never know in politics. Things can happen. And in small island nations, because the population is small, people are angry that they are in the middle of rising sea waters, nobody cares about them, COP dismisses their concerns, they're angry, they want their sovereignty. The key word nowadays is sovereignty. We don't want to be told what to do by somebody else. And in that sense, I would say there's a culture that's developed in China which is both annoying and good, and that is non-interference in other people's affairs. This is good because it means that you respect other people's sovereignty. It's annoying because sometimes you want a country like, China has a certain... you want the Chinese government to say, hey, listen, this is not a good thing what you guys are doing. Let's, you should abolish poverty. We would like the lessons of abolition of poverty. Come and tell people, listen, this is how you can... But non-interference means, okay, you want to maintain poverty, you maintain poverty. So you know what I mean?
Yeah, my friends in Nauru, they're saying you should intervene, so stop Japanese from releasing the nuclear wastewater from Fukushima, right?
Yeah.
Because Japanese media is saying this is our interior affair, so you should not intervene.
Yeah.
That's a very...
The sentiment is almost like the US constantly telling everybody that don't worry about it, we are a benign hegemon, we're just going to put nuclear weapons, we're just going to military bases on your land and force you into a proxy war, but it's fine, we're a benign hegemon. And everybody says, no, no, it's not about what you think, it's about what we think. Well, China's like, okay, we don't want to interfere on one of it. And then the rest is saying that, dude, wake up now, okay? Do
A
something.
little bit of interference is okay. It's not like you don't have to be. Nobody wants you to invade. I mean, we don't want a world of Chinese military bases, okay? And I don't think the Chinese government is interested either. You know, I mean, it's a waste of your money to go and build bases around the world because unless you're seeking world conquest, I mean, this is not a video game. This is real life. Yeah. Sometimes I think that the U.S. government thinks the world is a video game. You know, you just put like, I'm gonna put a base here. I'm gonna put a base like the game of Risk. I don't want the world to be Risk. You know, I want people to be able to enjoy their lives. You know what the greatest joy is? Okay, I never wanted to be a political reporter. I wanted to be a sports reporter. I love writing. I write a column on cricket. I love sports. You know, I love writing about sports. I wanted to write about music. You know, and politics is to some extent boring. You know,
he's a scientist, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, we all have.
And I read his article on Li Xiaolong, Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
I was shocking to find, Vijay was writing on Bruce Lee. How? And
I love writing about things like that.
He's interested to find out, Vijay has a new function.
People are complicated, right? So we want to get beyond, humans want to get beyond conflict. You know, I mean, obviously you'll never get beyond conflict, but big conflict.
Yeah.
You know?
But can I ask you, like, so we, for the past half a century, and also, you know, the U.S. military alliances, NATO's here, military bases there, we sort of like get into this notion of that assumption that, like, you sort of have to have some sort of a military alliance to be even sovereign. Like, you have to have some sort of a military backing to even claim that you are sovereign. What you're saying that is not the case. Countries can remain in cooperation, global partnerships, alliances without actually going into military alliance.
Look, firstly, let's be a little practical. I mean, today, for a country like China to say we're going to just get rid of our military would be a huge error. Because we are facing a challenge from countries that actually do invade other countries. I mean, the United States did invade Iraq, did destroy Libya. The Libya example is interesting. Gaddafi made a deal with the West. He told the West, look, I'm going to pay for the people who died in Lockerbie when the bomb went off on the plane. He said, I'm not admitting responsibility, but we'll pay for the victims of Lockerbie. We want to have a normal relationship with the Western countries and we'll give up our nuclear weapons program. And then they were destroyed. I mean, think of the lesson that the Libya example gives to the rest of the world. Do you think North Korea is going to say, okay, we're going to just give up our nuclear weapons? Why? Because, we think now we're going to, when President, what was his name, Moon was there in South Korea and, they had this sunshine policy, we're just going to give up our nuclear weapons. Huge mistake, because then comes Yoon and, and then comes Trump and whatever. Like right now we are not in a stage where we can give up our defensive capabilities. I think it would be an error for a country like China to think that it needs to create an offensive capability. I think having a defensive capability right now is sufficient. Once you have nuclear weapons, why do you need other things? Because, somebody attacks you, you clobber them. I mean, I'm not saying you use a nuclear weapon, but you can use a big weapon, What the Soviet Union did, I think, which was a mistake that needs to be studied, is that the Soviet Union, after having tested hydrogen bomb, they continued to try to maintain parity with the West. The Western capitalist system actually benefits by increased military spending because they are not interested in social spending. They balance their economy with military spending. When the Soviets tried to have parity, they took money away from infrastructure, investment, from social spending, and they bankrupted the country. It's a big mistake for a country like China to say, well, we need parity with the US. You don't need parity. You need to defend yourself. That's important. Eventually, in 200-300 years, after we are long gone, I'm hoping that we reach a stage which is a little bit like the Federation, in Star Trek, where, we're beyond money, You know why I like sometimes Star Trek is a really boring show, but sometimes I like watching it because there's no money and there really isn't conflict. You know, they meet some weird aliens who attack
Borg.
them. Yeah, some weird aliens, but you don't need to meet them. Just stay at home. Why are you flying in the? They only meet the aliens when they go far away, and there's no conflict in the home planets. You know.
Yeah,
it
but
is-
in a way, isn't that the situation that humanity can only unite when there is a massive, gigantic alien like?
I don't know. Those are
is that
American
right?
movies you're watching. I think it's some 300 years from now, people will
Yeah.
find a way to get beyond these petty conflicts. I mean, in these science fiction shows, there's no money. People get into the train. There's no tickets.
That's true.
They just eat. They're post commodification. And that's the society I want to live in, is a post-commodification society. People say, what will you do? You built these so-called dark factories. There's no workers, how will people earn? Why do we need to earn from our work? Why can't we just work for fun? And build a society where, I can go out and paint, or I can, entertain people. I would love to by the way, all three of us entertain people for free, basically. Okay, we don't make a huge living. Yeah, I do lectures. I never get paid for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I write books. I never get paid for them. I write articles. I don't get paid for it. I don't monetize anything. Okay, I live like an idiot. In fact, are you paying me for this?
No.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not getting paid
What
for
is
this.
that?
I'm not
Yeah.
getting paid.
I got a cup of coffee, and you pick me up and
He
whatever.
paid for
you know.
his own taxi.
He paid for his own taxi. I mean, we're crazy people.
Yeah, I know we are crazy people.
But we're happy.
Are you happy?
And
Yeah.
we're happy.
Yeah.
And what is the pursuit of life? It's not money, it's happiness. And so that's where 200-300 years from now,
Yeah.
I always think people like us, we are time travelers. We are time travelers from a future of happiness. We've come from some future and we're telling people, relax, you don't need to make all this money. You need to pursue happiness. In fact, this is an old Greek concept, eudaimonia. Aristotle writes at length about it. What is life? It's a pursuit of happiness, eudaimonia. That's the pursuit of happiness. That's what we seek, yeah? So, yes, in some future time, we'll all be, when we go back to our home planets, the three of us, we're aliens from some happy future, advanced civilization. Sorry to sound arrogant, but, maybe we are.
We are aliens from advanced civilization,
from
not on Earth
from
today.
from a future advanced civilization, both time and space travel. But the fact is that I think this is where humanity could go if we don't destroy everything. And I would like to say to people in the West that stop pursuing power and money. Pursue happiness and fellowship. And how can you live in a society? Gandhi said something amazing in 1925. Gandhi said, the true test of a country is not the number of millionaires it has, but the absence of starvation of its people. So we can update that. The true test of civilization is not the number of billionaires you have, but the absence of poverty among the people. You go to New York, there are people sleeping on the street.
Yeah.
I was in Australia recently, in Sydney. So many people on the street, mostly people, Aboriginal backgrounds and so on. It's disgraceful. How can
Yeah.
you call that a civilization?
I was in Morocco recently, my first time visiting the house in Marrakesh. It's literally a war between absolute poverty and absolute extravagance. And that's when you really realize, such is the legacy of colonialism, because people are actually okay with it. And if you look at per capita GDP, Morocco's per capita GDP is actually on par level or even higher, let's check, with China. So by that measure, you come back and think that China really should not look like China. Like we've been to some of the poorest regions, like mountainous regions where nobody even should live there, like given the natural conditions. But they have 5G, they have high-speed railways, they have roads. I mean, no...
They have clean water.
Yeah, clean water. I mean, nothing, electricity. No, I mean, none of the bourgeois luxury stuff, the shit that happens in Shanghai. But, it's a normal living, happy village. And so by that notion, you compare to Morocco. China should not look like China.
But you gave the example of Morocco. I was in New York. There
Yeah.
was a man walking around the street without pants. Yeah, he was disoriented.
Yeah.
He was walking around with pants, and people were just walking by him. That's not a civilization. That just cannot be
No. It's
reality.
freedom. Darling,
It's-
we call it
It's
freedom.
freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not even freedom. It just makes me want to cry. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that to me is the proof that we are thinking in the correct way, which is we don't want country like China doesn't need to feel we need to tell the world what to do. But you've done a few things which
That
you
can
can
be
model.
shared.
You can model it to the world. Like it is possible for a poor country. China was a wretchedly poor country,
Yeah.
into the 1960s. Yeah, I first came to China in the 1980s. It was a poor country.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Shanghai was not this in the 1980s. Not this at all. Firstly, there's something that was very cool about Shanghai, which is maybe all cities, but I only came here because we went to the countryside outside here. There were like 1,000 bicycles at a red light and no cars. It was
No,
miraculous.
it's vivid
you know.
memory for maybe for you. Is it? For
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
Yeah, it was incredible. Countryside, super poor. Went
Yeah.
to see these, cooperatives, collectives, whatever, super poor. But people had dignity because the revolution had given them a sense of dignity. They had dignity plus poverty. They had literacy but still poverty. They were eating sufficiently but still poverty, meaning the infrastructure was poor, roads were not great, and so on. These were amazing advances that have taken place here. Now, you go to other countries, they haven't had a revolution. So the dignity question is serious. I mean, what are we striving for? I'm striving for to live a happy life, but to live a life where the society is dignified. That you don't have somebody roaming around without pants. If they have some, medical issues, they should be tended to. They can't just be allowed to roam around because, they may not know what's going on. They're disoriented, they have schizophrenia, whatever. That's not a dignified society. You want to live in a dignified society. That's the goal, So I think what we propose to the world, the three of us are proposing to the world, is don't be satisfied living in barbarism. Capitalism is barbarism because it exactly is that. Extreme poverty, extreme extravagance. That's barbarism. I don't want to see the first trillionaire in the world. Jeff Bezos of Amazon, his ambition in life is not to solve the problem of clean water. His ambition of life is to become the first trillionaire. That is vulgarity. That is not something that impresses me. It diminishes him in our eyes. Why do we need a trillionaire? Why do we need billionaires? I mean, what are you going to do with all your money? How many houses do you want? I get it, you want to live well, but how well? Enough for 12 generations? This is nuts. And frankly, people who are that wealthy, their children are routinely unable to create a life for themselves because they don't have ambition. They don't have motivation to be decent people. They have money around them. They get used to ordering people around. What a culture that is. Horrible. They don't know how to clean a dish. I was talking to a teacher once who told me that she has students at a prestigious school. They don't know how to peel a banana.
That's a good question because I drive an RV. I have to do everything myself. I have to fix pipes. I have to climb to the solar panel, the opening and wire stuff. I have to learn everything. But before that, I don't know how to do wood jobs. To use a machine to put nails and tucks. But now I learned everything. And with working with workers, I felt I was thinking it could be very tedious and tired to do those jobs. But after finishing everything, I feel very good about myself. Yeah.